Perfect. Yep.
You ready? All right. So welcome everyone to the webinar this evening. My name is Dr. Marco Caravaggio. I'm a pediatric and family wellness chiropractor in Markham, Ontario. And tonight I'm going to be interviewing somebody who came into my life, I don't know how long ago, maybe a year or two more, I think, and kind of had some interesting things, and we had some good connection. I like what he's doing, and his name is Lucas, and I'll get him to introduce himself, and I'll be interviewing him a little bit because he's done some pretty interesting things with his life, and he's written a book, and he's got a lot of things going on, and I think it would be interesting for a lot of people, and he could share some insights on something that's often misunderstood in the public and has to get some more awareness out there. So go ahead and introduce yourself, Lucas.
Perfect. Yes. So my name is Lucas Moffat. Thank you for joining this evening, ladies and gentlemen. And yeah, so about myself, I'm a fourth-year student at the University of Waterloo. That's at the base. Surrounding that, there's a lot of things going on. I just published a book on Tourette Syndrome, which is kind of what this interview is about, and we'll talk about that. That's the one. In addition to that, I'm involved in a few different startups. So I have experience working in everything from running a coffee shop to environmental projects. I'm based in South America. Technology as well. That was one of my most recent co-op jobs. I consider myself pretty proficient in technology. And so now kind of next steps looking at merging, especially now, the benefits of healthcare and technology and how we can create a solution. So what drove me here is kind of my passion for understanding and learning about basically why people do what they do and what, causes us to act in certain ways. And so for me, that was driven by my own experience with a neurological condition called Tourette Syndrome. And so Tourette Syndrome, there's a lack of clarity, if you will, because there's a lot of information and research, but not all of it is the most cohesive, and some may be in disagreement with, other information. And so the journey which I wanted to embark on was really about trying to figure out how we could take these different perspectives, as well as my own perspective, and figure out how we could get that into something that was practical, universally available, and that could be put into the hands of people from, any background, essentially, whether they're a young child or an older adult. And so once I kind of had that, made that decision, what was next was figuring out, who are the people that are, kind of experts in different fields pertaining to neurology and health, and how I can basically get in contact with them to get their perspectives. So really we can create something that's comprehensive with anecdotal and empirical evidence, which is how I ran into Dr. Caravaggio's path. So I saw an event hosted by Dr. Caravaggio. He's a chiropractor, and what I saw was that he was doing a lot of things which kind of went beyond the scope of just a traditional straightforward chiropractor, in the sense that his knowledge was far beyond that of a traditional chiropractor. And so I attended a session on neurological disorders and learned from his insight treating patients and what that looked like. And it was a very positive experience. So fast forward, a year and a half later, and here we are. The book has been published, and, so far so good. And now we're trying to see, who we can, help in terms of if there's information. And also I'm going to be talking about some of the things I did to, not just overcome the Tourette syndrome and live like an average life, but how to, actually begin to live optimally and reach your full potential, and how to channel that energy from the Tourette's into, productivity, basically.
Perfect. That's great. Yeah. So I guess before I get started, like I kind of mentioned, we should probably put the old disclaimer out there before we get too deep into the details and stuff. So like I say, I'm not a medical doctor. We're not giving medical advice. I'm just having a conversation with Lucas. I just did my chiropractic for over 20 years now. I've just been interested in neurology in the brain, and we call it like a sort of a teaching on chiropractic functional neurology. I've done lots and lots of courses on, autism spectrum, ADHD, and all the different things. And just to kind of get just the concept of the brain and how we can kind of do certain approaches to the body that can help sort of bring up certain areas of the brain that might not have the same level of functioning as others, and try to balance things out and help the body function more appropriately. And when Lucas came to my the seminar at my office, one of the things we always try to get people to understand is that, when I'm doing my work, I'm not trying to treat anything. So people can have 100,000 different conditions and symptoms and stuff, and we're just trying to make the body work the way it's supposed to and improve health. So even in Lucas's book, he's got a lot of sections on just, talking about what can you do just to be like a healthier person. And, even if you have the condition, you want to be as healthy as you can with the condition sort of thing, right? And then what kind of things you can do in your life. And so I just want to put that disclaimer out there. I might be giving some theories and hypotheses that I might have that don't have any scientific backing, but they're just things I've been reading and stuff, and some things that make sense to me as far as the neurology and things like that. I might throw some of those things in there along the way as well. Sound good?
Absolutely.
So I think one of the things, just maybe just give it, because a lot of people, I can guarantee 95% of the public, they ask what Tourette is, they're probably thinking of the corporalia thing where somebody's going to be yelling and swearing and obscenity and moving around and, flicking and stuff. But we know that that's probably maybe about 10% of the people that actually have that, correct? So can you just give just an idea of, people who don't know what it is, how would you define it and what is the definition if you want to get into that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start off by saying, the definition, take this with a grain of salt because it varies for everybody, right? But generally from my experience and working with people with the condition and doctors, what we say Tourette syndrome is, it's a condition where essentially it's a combination of kind of this urge to do something, this discomfort, this decreased inhibition, and kind of in combination with some sort of outlet, right? So for the way I describe it, kind of what the complex of, when a tic is about to kind of occur, when it's manifesting, and then when it's actually released and performed, it's an interesting process, but I kind of like to liken it to something like a mosquito bite, in the sense that when you get a mosquito bite, you notice there's a spot on your arm, you may itch it, and you feel that sense of relief, right? But when you stop itching it, there's kind of something in the back of your head going like, man, like I should probably scratch that, like, because, it's going to relieve this discomfort. Unfortunately, with the tics, they never stop. So with the mosquito bite, there's this kind of forced stop on how long you can scratch it. You scratch it long enough and it'll start to bleed. And that's, kind of a very, physical sign that, hey, I've probably, maxed out on scratching this area. But with the tics, after you, actually, perform that tic or scratch that bite, if you will, generally the relief isn't there. And it's kind of an inverse relation in some sense where, when you begin to tic, it will almost trigger more tics. And so it can get in this like cycle. And sometimes it can be difficult to get out of that when you're in the middle of one, but learning to step away from kind of that cycle and understanding why you perform certain behaviors is really important. So Tourette syndrome isn't just, tics. The statistics vary depending on what scholarly sources you look at, right? Generally, they say upwards of 60%, 60 to 80% of people with Tourette syndrome will have a comorbid or like another additional disorder.
Yeah.
So for many people, common ones like for myself include ADHD, OCD. There you'll also find varied perspectives on what they classify Tourette syndrome as. Some people list it as part of the spectrum disorder. So it's on the spectrum with autism and ADHD and OCD. And some scientists will say that they kind of liken it to the manifestation of that performance, right? So there's different neurological kind of, essentially it's a malfunctioning or it appears to be. And, the combination of our environment, our diet, our behaviors, our habits all influence what that looks like over a long period of time.
Right.
So I also have a diagnosis of ADHD and OCD, which helps kind of bring perspective to the Tourette syndrome information I try to provide.
Yes.
And so I think.
And so with Tourette's, basically, but they kind of have to say you should have a motor and a vocal tic.
Correct.
Much, right?
Yeah. So I should mention that's a great point. Yeah. So to kind of move from what they call it just a tic disorder to actual Tourette syndrome, the presence of both the motor and the vocal tic are required for at least a year. And generally, they say it starts before the age of 12 years old-ish. The age when I was diagnosed was around 10. Now kids are getting diagnosed at an earlier age because, from the experience physicians have, they're able to identify earlier and more efficiently.
Right. And a couple of things I want to point out to some people, a lot, because I deal a lot with spectrum kids and things like that. And, unfortunately, a lot of times it always gets misinterpreted as the kid acting out or misbehaving on purpose. And I always kind of get people to understand that it's an automatic thing, and you have to work on it. If somebody's looking at you right now, people wouldn't even know you have it, right?
Exactly.
maybe somebody might pick up like an extra blink or something like that, but that's about it, right? So you've done a pretty good job. But like if people didn't know you had it, they wouldn't even go, just by watching this, most people wouldn't even be aware, right? So like just it's an important thing to understand that sometimes when neurons are firing, if the pathways aren't worked the way they properly, and there's a lot of this thing called inhibition, like most of your brain is just trying to stop stuff from happening. There's like a general thing, but there's a lot of pathways in your brain that are just inhibiting. Okay, we'll let that go now, sort of thing. But when the inhibitory pathways don't work or they're not wired properly, then all of a sudden things are going that shouldn't be going, and then you have this kind of stuff. But it's not, there's a lot of automaticness to it. Like it's not like the kid is doing it to misbehave. And all these kids that are misbehaving or whatever, they really, they want their love of their parents and they want to be accepted and all that stuff. And so just go back, because I know I read your story, and when you first, I can't remember how old you were, but I think you're 5 or 7 or something like that when you were in the pool. So just give me that sort of, the pool story, and tell the people about when it first happened to you and what it felt like.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the famous pool. So so from a young age, I kind of realized there was something, different, maybe unique about me. I never, I don't even think I had the ability to understand whether it was good or bad or what it was. But around the age of 7 years old, that began to change. So I was at a pool, like one of those like local family pool kind of things. Mm-hmm. And we're swimming. It was a normal day. And I don't know what happened that day that caused this to all of a sudden be like, the process of my, thoughts or patterns. But I was swimming, and when I was swimming, it was in the shallow end. So my top half of the body was above water and my bottom half, was below the water. And basically I was just swimming, and I went to put my foot down, and in the pool, there's these, square tiles, and between the tiles, there's this grout, and the tiles are very smooth. But the grout, if you don't know, is kind of rough, and it's a different texture. And so the way my foot hit the ground, it like hit both at the same time. It hit the tile, and then it hit the grout. And as soon as it hit the grout, it was almost like I just like stepped on a nail or something. The way like my body, and not really my body per se, but I guess my mind reacted, because when my foot touched that tile, it was like all these alarms went off, and something, there was this imbalance, something, needed to be fixed immediately. And I don't know what drove that. It was my intuition or something, because the way my body just determined at that point to fix this imbalance was to go down and touch the grout with my hand. And it doesn't really make sense. And that's what the scientists are still trying to figure out, and the physicians to this day. But I realized at that point, something was kind of different. And my dad noticed right away, and said, what was that about? Why did you kind of just dive into the pool like that? Yeah. And at the time, I didn't really have an explanation that I thought would be valid. So I just said, like, I needed a boost, right, kind of get myself out of the water. And he said, okay. And it kind of went on. And from there, that's when the tics really began to kind of manifest themselves in more visible ways. And I'd like to even mention, like right now, for example, you can only see my face, which is good, because some of the tics, for example, like I might tap my finger, I might kind of, play with my hands, things like that, where there's the energy being released and the central nervous system is being stimulated in the correct way. But as the audience, you can't see it because I chose to direct that kind of energy in that regard as the outlet. And so from there in class, I began this squeaking sound. It was like, and a lot of clearing of the throat. So they thought I had asthma, maybe allergies. I was tested for allergies. They took all those needles and stuck them in my back, and, determined which spots, were having allergic reactions. I then had an asthma inhaler. So the puffers, as they called them. And it helped a little bit, the puffer, because, I think my airways were clearer. But overall, there was no real change. And in fact, it started to get worse. And it got to a point where I was getting kicked out of class quite frequently, not just for the tics. The behavior itself, but it was largely the tics, because I'd be making noises. I started doing a tic where I would laugh instead of make the squeak, because it was kind of more casual. And from there, that's really when it started, because pretty much every time I'd laugh, they'd think I was fooling around and I'd get kicked out of class. And it was like, now what? What do I do from here? So I think that kind of explains like part of, my story as the misperceptions of it.
that thing sometimes, like we call it like a sensory trick. So the contact on your foot, you had to go put your hand on it, right? So we notice sometimes like people might put their hand in front of their face or do something like that, like touch something just to send a different input into the nerve system that maybe might help an inhibitory pathway prevent the thing from happening, right? So like you touching your hand, that kind of thing. And so over your kind of life, going to the different Dr. Duncan McKinley and all that kind of stuff, you kind of learn some strategies to kind of, like you say, you're still kind of happening, but you're sort of redirecting it so it's not really so obvious to the public, sort of thing, right? Yeah. So what kind of steps did you sort of take, or what kind of things do you do right now actually to kind of, make it look less obvious, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think in terms of like the largest differences, for me, my preference really comes out of a preference for functionality and results, right? So I say to people all the time, like my Tourette's aren't the problem, it's the environment which the Tourette's occur in. So if I'm in a classroom and I'm ticking, then obviously that's going to be noticeable. So the biggest part really is the lifestyle. I'd say it's not a quick fix. There's a few key solutions and kind of aspects. So start off with, for me, what I noticed, if I am not like doing anything in the day, like if I'm kind of bored, or even just like, not using all of my energy in the day, that's kind of when the tics start to, occur. So just even as a whole, keeping myself busy, having a healthy diet, and constantly learning, I think is the biggest thing I've learned. I had some different strategies, which were like included physical activity. I've always been a big fan and advocate for physical activity and the benefits it can make physically and cognitively, as well as the diet. One of the things Dr. Caravaggio talked to me about, which actually I, used myself and found it effective, was this type of fish oil, which has unique properties, which has been helpful for myself. But right now, the day-to-day, I'd say, in terms of what helps me most, is a combination of learning and physical activity. And really, if I don't learn enough or I don't do enough physical activity, at the end of the day, I notice like there's something not right here. And this is the case in many disorders. They notice in people who have dyslexia that there's a region in their brain, I believe it's the left planum temporal. And they actually, when they do the fMRI scans, it's actually smaller than a person without dyslexia. But what they saw is over time, when you give that person like, lots of readings and different ways to stimulate the mind, that region in the brain actually increases in size, corresponding to an increase in function and strength. And the other thing is, I'd say, your habits and your actions, right? So what you believe, coming to a sense of self-acceptance, and trying to figure out, what are the positive ways to channel your energy kind of in all circumstances, right? It's easy to get caught up in, the whole thing and, just focus on the negative. That's definitely, and I felt that for a long time. But what I realized, and I wish I knew it sooner, was just as simple of a change as having a positive attitude, being optimistic all the time. And even if you're going to do one like all in or all out, I'd say be optimistic and be positive, because it will get you in better, situations and better outcomes than the contrary of, being negative all the time.
Yes, for sure. So just a couple of things. So it's not a fish oil. It's a seal oil, right? Mammalian, if you remember that, the oil. Just with that one correction, it's called Ohm.
My apologies. Yeah, mammalian seal oil.
That's the one, right? Yeah, bit of a difference in that one. And so a couple of things with just kind of maintaining two ideas. So number one, physical activity. So I think you like basketball. That's one of your big things, right? You do stuff like that. And it's a really good, important outlet. Like let's say there's a parent that just newly discovers their kid has Tourette's. A couple of things to think in mind. Like during the day, they might be trying to suppress it at school if they can think about suppressing it. But then if they do that, then it'll come back really, really heavy when they get home, or it'll be even worse when they finally can let go. That happens often, correct? And so the other thing that parents should be aware of is maybe not getting the kid to do something right away when they get home. They need to decompress somehow. So what kind of strategies would you give a parent maybe is just learning the kid has Tourette's, or they're just kind of understanding it now if they have a kid in that? What would you recommend to them?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so this actually, it was kind of funny because I was volunteering at a Tourette Syndrome clinic at the time where this came to light, because there was one patient who was going to the clinic, and after school, his symptoms were really, really bad. And there was a lot of, concerns from the parent perspective. And when the questions were, began being asked, one of the biggest things right away was, yeah, he comes home from school and then he has to do 2.5 hours of chores right away. And it was almost like, well, of course he's going to have terrible tics. I mean, he's holding it in. So it's like he's under 8 hours of trying to keep this thing locked in, and he's finally ready to let it out. And then it's like, okay, now more work. And it's kind of like you look at it as like a beaker in a sense where, you can get to the halfway point, and then at the full way point, it starts to overflow. And so for people with Tourette syndrome, think of their beaker kind of being, constantly half full or at the 90% mark, where especially if they come home from school. And I'd say really kind of try and, understand what they're feeling. A lot of times they'll have a lot of thoughts or a lot of feelings going on, especially after school when they're trying to release their tics. So give them some time, give them some, basically give them obviously it depends on your child, but generally give them their own personal space, right? So that they can do something they would like to do or enjoy, whether it's for half an hour, it really depends on the person. And then, if the chores need to be done, that's okay. At some point, right, the chores have to be done. But see, maybe if they can do an hour now, an hour later, and in the meantime, they can watch TV or maybe they have homework. But trying to create that balance. I mean, if for them, can be kind of like there's the scale and they always feel like it's tipped on the wrong side. You have to kind of approach that situation thinking like, this person is going to be not in the best mood. How can I help them, be successful and achieve the goals we both want, but also, keeping that in mind so that we can have a positive environment. That's really it. I mean, I think trying to foster a sense of positivity and kind of, giving them that ability to make the decision. And from there, positive things generally happen.
That's right. Excellent. Cool. And so just like from our neurology kind of framework of it, like you were describing, you said it was dyslexia, usually there's a left brain. So the way we kind of look at it in our functional neurology stuff, we kind of look at the functionality, right brain, left brain, and a lot of the comorbidities with the whole Tourette's, if you want to put it in the spectrum, we kind of say typically the right side of your brain will put the brakes on your body and prevent things or slow things from happening. And the left side would make things go, sort of thing. And we typically say, we have a Ferrari engine on the left side and we have bicycle brakes on the right side. So things are going all the time, but the brakes aren't happening. And that's why stuff is going all the time. And so like the way I kind of look at it is, the whole spectrum, there can be a lot of comorbidities because generally when the right brain is negatively impacted by whatever it is that happens in youth, depending on how big it is and what spots on the right side, it'll cause different things. It might just cause like a high functioning, Asperger person, or it might cause, if it's maybe affecting basal ganglia and some connections in there, then it might be causing like a tic thing or a Tourette thing. But because the right side is generally affected a lot of different parts, then those comorbidities might all come together because it's generally a right brain kind of problem. And some of the things I might look at, if the right hemisphere is not working as good, then, this side is controlling, we call it motor control on the left side of my body, but involuntary stuff on this side. And usually the brain is inhibiting things in the body, but when it doesn't inhibit things, this muscle here, for example, the sternocleidomastoid might get tighter and cause the person to have a right head tilt. And we might look at their eyes and say, one pupil is not constricted. We know when you're calm, your pupils are pretty small because you're relaxed, but when you're in fight or flight, they might be bigger. So if one side is not working and not inhibiting, it might look like a bigger pupil on one side compared to the other, and things like that we might be looking at. And a lot of times the connectivity is an interesting thing too, because, typically, for a normal functioning brain, there's a lot of like overlap, cross-crawling, cross-pollination and talking before things happen. But with the autism spectrum, we kind of say some parts are like underconnected and other parts are overconnected. So I always say they're almost always like a genius activity. Like they might be super awesome at doing something. It might be a left brain activity, like putting things in order, sizing things up, and some sort of thing on the left brain. But then the right brain would be more emotional stuff. So we kind of say emotional quotient is on the right brain, intelligence quotient is on the left brain. So the right brain would be setting up a lot of things like, how to behave in public, how to act, how to interact with people, understanding body language. And then left side is where you get your intellectual intelligence, learning how to do math and reading and talking and that kind of thing. And so when the right side gets compromised, then those kind of things might show up as, challenges with socialization and that kind of stuff. And that can always be a big thing too. So I know a lot of times I know with somebody like with Tourette's or any kind of condition, they're always, I don't want to say they want to make an excuse for it, but like what you said, when you went down and had to touch the water and when you came up, you had to kind of like make up a story for your dad to make it seem real, like make sense to him. So just can you give any sort of like there's an important thing of being able to accept yourself and understanding that it's okay. Like you talked about it in the book, that there was a certain point where you said, well, it's not really like a bad thing that I have this now. How did you kind of come to that sort of change in your thought process on it? Like, it's not such a bad thing for me. It's actually kind of like a gift in a certain way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was two key developments really that kind of began catalyzing that change in perspective. The first being when at the time when I was in grade 10, I was fortunate enough to see a psychologist named Dr. Duncan McKinley. And at that point, I hadn't met anybody else with the condition. And so for me, it was always very confusing. I went to different doctors across Ontario, across Canada, and nobody really had any sort of answers, but there was no models which I could look at, or frameworks and see, okay, like frameworks for success. And when I met Dr. McKinley, and his vocal tics were significantly worse than mine. In fact, that was kind of the trademark of him. I could kind of hear him coming down the hall.
Yeah, down the hall, right?
And it was kind of at that point where I saw him, like, the Dr. McKinley, with Tourette syndrome, and it was like, because at that point I hadn't even thought anything like that was even possible for somebody with this disorder. And there it was, very in front of my eyes, kind of saying otherwise. And it was kind of like a light bulb went off in my head. Something changed, which made me realize, like, if he can do it with this condition, my condition is not an excuse to not be able to do it. And so in that point, then the onus then fell on me rather than the condition. And at that point, I had to begin to accept and understand, well, okay, if this is how I am, if this is, what I'll be facing, what are the things that can turn this negative into a positive, essentially. So one of the things about having Tourette syndrome and ADHD is I have a lot of energy generally. So probably a lot of parents will see the kids with ADHD, they have trouble sleeping in the evenings, sitting still. So really figuring out ways that you can optimize that energy into productive means. And that was a huge one, because for most people with Tourette syndrome, they'll find a similar thing. The only time their symptoms kind of stop is when they're doing something that they kind of really enjoy, that kind of uses like their cognitive like space, like their tools essentially. So for me, when I played basketball, it was like everything stopped. I was in this zone of flow. Like my Tourette syndrome wasn't even in the equation. It was just basketball, what was the next play? And so from there, even beyond just, trying to get better, basketball became kind of like a sanctuary and an outlet where, I knew this was going to help. So I did it. And then I was playing competitive basketball at the time. I was playing AAU, so we played actually internationally as well in tournaments in like Pennsylvania at the time. And that's when I realized, like, hey, this energy thing isn't too bad if I can use it at the right, in the right means. So I began practicing basketball for 3-4 hours a day. My skills increased drastically. And then when I was facing the competition, I realized, like, hey, over this 1 year, I made this improvement. And after getting into university, and I'd like to preface this too, because, although now I'm an honors Dean's List student, pre-med student, I was never like an academic guy growing up. So I'd also like to say that's a good thing, because, if you don't think your kids are, taking a keen interest in books or school, I never read as a kid, and I just wrote a book. So don't worry about that. But yeah, basically the physical activity and the discipline I learned from that physical activity was definitely like one of the most important kind of skills, and transferable skills, because then when I got into university and I didn't have all the time to play basketball, I still had that discipline and that mindset where I was able to, apply that discipline to studying for 3-4 hours at a time rather than, playing basketball. But the outcome was the same. When I was learning interesting facts, everything kind of stopped for a minute. It was just the information in front of me. And that kind of fostered that, passion and really drive to learn as much as I could, because, it's always good to learn. But when it's like the only time this thing that's bothering you 24/7 stops is when you're learning, it's like, well, I'm going to do that as much as I can. So I'd say that's another thing. And it's not like, you can just all of a sudden, I'm going to read 20 books a day, but, you kind of get introduced, the concept, get familiar, and with the right support mechanisms and environment, things I'd say organically will flourish.
Yeah, that's great. And so just one concept just to kind of help people, like if somebody has Tourette's and they're thinking, well, how can I kind of, I don't want to say manage it better, but just you talk about doing substitutions, right? Can you just talk about that briefly? Like, because a lot of people, they might not know this is something they could possibly do to make it kind of, quote unquote, look better to the general public sort of thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So substitutions is a big one. I mean, generally, the substitutions, they can be done for your own sake or for the sake of, and which is why I did them, for basically not causing disruption and kind of blending in with the rest of the class. So for me, I quickly learned that there was other ways which I could kind of release that discomfort or scratch that itch in a sense where it wasn't going to be so obvious. So when I was younger, I used to be throat clearing, laughing, even squeaking sounds, where from there I've kind of learned how to transform them and have that outlet in physical activities. So tapping of the finger, which I think, and sometimes even I'll just kind of, pinch my fingers like that together. And as, weird as that or illogical may sound, it's because the fingers are like the nerve endings. So there's actually a lot of stimulation which occurs when you do that. And if you move two fingers, it doesn't make a sound, but you can get that same stimulus kind of going to the brain. And when you do it for long enough, the tics kind of substitute themselves. Because the other thing, which is kind of unfortunate, is the more you do the tic, perform that action, the more your body is primed to do that action. And you kind of reinforce yourself doing this unintended behavior, which with Tourette's, that's just part of the package. So kind of transforming that into, yeah.
That's a big thing too, because it's almost like there's a whole term we call neuroplasticity, right? Like we say, neurons that fire together, wire together. So the more you use them, the more they get used to using them, and then they get super efficient at doing it. So if you have this tic, so like you say, that's actually a good one, because like there's a thing in the brain called the homunculus, which is like a representation of how much nerves in that part of your brain are dedicated to a body part. And the fingers are a huge representation, and the other one is the tongue. And I know a lot of times people have like tongue tics that, it's in their mouth, you don't really notice it, but it might be, going up to the roof of their tongue or that kind of thing. So substituting another sort of large representation thing, like, the lips or something like that, even just doing like something like that might be like a sensory thing that might not look, too weird. It might be, instead of, maybe, flailing a hand or something like that, right? But that's kind of an interesting one, pressure, fingers, touching, that kind of thing. That's interesting. And so that's pretty good so far. So give me an idea about the book. What gave you the idea to write the book, and how long did it take? And now that it's out, tell us a bit about the name of it and that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So the idea to write the book kind of came organically through exploring the problem. So I knew I wanted to create some sort of resource that could help provide useful information and kind of a framework for learning to live with this condition, not just living with it, but really, thriving and reaching your full potential. And so I was volunteering for a clinic at the time, and basically I was trying to figure out what is going to be the best way to get this information to the people who need it most. And I considered mobile applications, website, blogs, but the thing about books is really that they're accessible to anybody. That's part of the reason why I chose to write in a way where I say it could be understood by a smart 10-year-old. It does have some academic aspects, but it's kind of general writing. And when I was speaking to kind of stakeholders in the space, they're like, yeah, a book would be great. And then that's when I reached out to Dr. Duncan McKinley, who kind of wrote the last book that was kind of similar, written from somebody with the experience. And he wrote it in 2008, I believe. And it was a great book. It's still a great book. But the thing is, just some things have been, new information has been discovered, and also just kind of creating something that has, because everybody with Tourette syndrome is different. So creating something that's a bit, more modern. And so after I kind of came to that idea, it was really a matter of, okay, what's next? Because I'd never written a book before. So I had no idea where to start. So I was fortunate enough to be put in touch with my editor, Susan Fish, who was part of the incubator program. And I basically just asked her like, hey, I have this, I know it's a crazy idea, but do you think this is at all possible? And she looked at me and she's like, yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to edit it for you. I was like, oh, okay. So at that point, it was like, I looked at it, whether, if I wrote this book and it sucked, whatever, then I'd be at the very least, there would be no loss. I'd be in the same position. Whereas, if it went well, then, who knows where it would go. So fortunately, it did go well. From that point, from kind of talking about it, it was October 2018. And so I explored the problem more, attended some conferences, including at the Cornell Medical Center in New York. And from there, I kind of developed enough information and also began developing the connections, with Dr. Caravaggio, as well as Dr. Morton Doran and Dr. McKinley. Dr. Morton Doran, he's a retired surgeon with Tourette Syndrome and a member of the Order of Canada. And so I was fortunate enough to speak with him and get his insight. And so with, these three kind of experts in kind of various fields provided great complement. Then I basically spent about the next 10 months working on it. The first 6 months, they were long, but the next 4 months were much longer. The reason for that was because I was fortunate enough to receive funding from the university to write the book. But when you apply for that funding, you have to apply with timelines and key accomplishments. And basically I made, I said I'd have it done for this date. And so I had to do that. And so it definitely took a lot of work. It takes a while to write a book, but I'd say it's definitely possible for anybody who is interested in it or kind of thinking about it, for sure. Especially now, if you have the opportunity to be at home.
Yeah, exactly. So there's the book. So just tell everybody what it's called and where they can get it.
Yeah, so the book is called TikTok Go, Overcoming Tourette Syndrome. It's available on my website, tiktokgo.shop. That's TICTOCGO.SHOP. It's $24.99. And yeah, it'll ship pretty quickly, I think. All the orders are fulfilled through Shopify, so it's I've had no problems with it so far.
That's great.
Yeah, it's been great.
And it was, I read it, like I read Dr. McKinley's book and I read yours too. And I mean, reading yours is pretty easy read, and it's, we went through pretty quickly, and it was a good read, and it was interesting as I was going along. I was thinking the whole time, if it was somebody who wasn't interested in it like I am, but just like the average person, they would still get a lot of insight from it for sure. And that's good. And I was even able to give you a little bit. That's me. Yeah, like I said, I don't treat it, but I just have some insights on brain health and that kind of thing. So maybe we'll just kind of throw in a couple of those little things. So just asking about, how to keep your brain healthy and things like that.
Yeah, Doc, I was going to say to add in there, like Dr. Caravaggio's, what he really added was the ability to add information about returning your body to its, optimal state, where that's going to put you in a better position no matter where you are. So it was it was very helpful.
Yeah, there's a word we use, like salutogenesis. Salute means health and genesis means the creation of. So I always say, how can we create healthier people? And so especially with the brain, there's a lot of, research on this going all the time, and it's always changing and stuff. But just some of the concepts I think people get, like electrolytes are really important. Just think of your brain like an electrical thing, and, currents and have to flow all properly. So important electrolytes, I see people coming from like lemon water, lemon juices, celery juices. The big craze right now, it's helping a lot of people, but there's a lot of good minerals in that, and it can be very cleansing and that kind of thing. And so there's a big sort of trend right now. Everyone thinks that the whole brain is all made out of fat. A lot of the membrane is all fatty, but like inside there's a lot of glycogen and glucose. Like the brain really has to use a lot of glucose to work. So it's really important that you're supplying with good, healthy source of glucose, which would be coming mainly from fruits, and we call them clean carbohydrates, like, sweet potatoes and those kind of things. And I know a lot of that stuff is kind of vilified right now, and carbs are not good for you, but for your brain, good carbs are good, right? There's a difference between like a processed, chocolate bar and, Mother Nature's banana or something that's got electrolytes, and it's got amino acids, and it's got all that kind of stuff that would be good. And it gets slowly into your system. We're not worried about spiking insulin and stuff because it's real food. Real food, when it's eaten properly, can be beneficial for the brain. And, a lot of things trying to avoid a lot of the toxins for your brain too. So unfortunately, some of the worst stuff would be like artificial air fresheners and things like that, plastics and those kind of things. Like, I don't know, I can't remember the latest stats. I think they have like a credit card worth of plastic that gets into our body I can't remember what it is, every day, every week, every month, something like that, but it's a lot. So over the course of a year, 52 credit cards is not a good thing to have plastics and things in your brain. And then metals and things like that might be in the environment, and pollutants and things like that can be kind of, because if you get like metals into your brain that aren't supposed to be there, some researchers, like there's a guy named Christopher actually looking at Alzheimer's and brain function, and he says he's looking at autistic brains and Alzheimer's brains, and there's a lot of aluminum in there and things like that. So just trying to avoid that sort of being if you're close to like an industrial thing, try to get your air cleaned in your house and that kind of stuff, just and the other thing would be like unproductive fats. So good healthy fats that you might find in like an avocado, that's great, that's fine, everything else. But like trans fats and other kind of like, especially like industrial seed oils, very inflammatory. And like that would be like, coconut seed, cotton seed oil, sunflower seed oil, canola oil, some of the worst ones. So they're kind of inflammatory. I always say the oils are great when they're inside the vegetable because they're being protected by a lot of stuff. But as soon as you take it out there, it becomes volatile and it changes the shape, and usually have to deodorize it and clean it and do all this industrial stuff that really makes it not so good for your brain, right? So just try to avoid those, because like we do talk about the membrane of the cells, and the membrane has like that fatty layer around it and stuff. So you want the best fats in there for good conductivity of impulses and signals and those kind of things. So putting like a bad trans fat in your cell membrane is not very good, because it doesn't become very fluid like it's supposed to, and it can change conductivity and cause firings, things like that aren't very good. So just trying to really stick to like, just pretend like you don't have any technology and you're out in the wilderness. What would you eat? What would you grab? What would you find? Try to make your diet more of that if you can. That's kind of some of my hints on it. And then I guess just as far as my approach, like if somebody like with you came in, you did the functional neurology exam that I do on, touch your nose with your eyes closed and marching and all those funny tests that we do and those kind of things. And some of the approaches, especially with the brain health, like if the right side of the brain has a weakness, the right side of the brain has a tendency to, we say, like cause your general global musculature, the tone of your body, it's kind of set up by the right side of your brain. So sometimes with people has a right brain weakness, they might be floppy babies. They might, you pull them up and their head doesn't, their neck muscles don't engage when you try to lift them up. There's a thing called like a head leg test or pull to sit test. So important little things that we want to check on babies as they're growing up to make sure. And if they're not there, there's little reflexes that we try to engage, to try to get the reflex system to try to engage, activate the muscles to get some tone, especially like losing the curve in your neck, people's heads going forward and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of stuff, maybe make sure people can, do movements, maybe, turn your head side to side to activate the vestibular system, which can help you integrate and cause the muscles in your neck to kind of activate to maintain the curve in your neck. There's some important things there. And, when I see somebody on the spectrum, we're always making sure we're looking for something called retained primitive reflexes. There's these reflexes you have as a little baby that are supposed to, when your brain gets healthy, that reflex should go away. But if it's retained, it's usually hindering activity and brain development in certain areas. So it's always kind of hindering things. So if some of those reflexes are present, you might have difficulty focusing, you might have difficulty staying still, your posture, balance, and those kind of things might be off. So we would kind of assess which primitive reflexes might be lagging and try to, we call them integrate them, so that your body can go switch from a primitive reflex to a postural reflex and have more stability and upright posture and work on balance and those kind of things. We might do stuff on one side of the body to stimulate the right side of the brain and things like that, if that's where we find it. Those are some of the approaches. And obviously we say like there's a thing in your brain called the thalamus, which you might have heard of. It's kind of like the relay center for your brain, and we kind of call it like the pacemaker for the brain. So the thalamus kind of has like a sort of setting the stage for activity, and a lot of that setting the stage is gravity is the only constant thing that's happening to our body. So compression and expansion in joints, and we call them mechanoreceptors in your spine, or muscle spindles in your muscles. They're sending constant signals to your brain to know where you are in space. And so that gravity is the one constant we have, because some people might not hear, they might not see, we can take out a sense, but gravity is kind of always there, basically. And that's kind of like setting the baseline activity of your brain. And the part of your brain on the back called the cerebellum, if that's getting stimulated properly, that feeds into the thalamus, which then feeds into the whole cortex. And that's where your brain health can come from. So it's important that the bones in your spine move properly to stimulate your cerebellum, to push activity to your thalamus and to your prefrontal cortex, which then can inhibit things properly into your body. So those are just kind of some of the global things that we look at when we're working. It might be a little complicated for some people, but that's kind of some of the stuff we look at when people are coming to see us. So any last comments there, Lucas?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a good note to end on is, I guess, willpower in a sense, and kind of, really, I think what I learned was a lot more things are possible. You have to be willing to fail and get comfortable being uncomfortable, and, trying new things and learning, especially for people with Tourette syndrome, right? They may feel uncomfortable more than comfortable all the time. So just getting familiar with new situations, new activities, and really understanding, once you begin to accept and, basically, be comfortable with who you are, and then begin pursuing growth on a long-term basis. I mean, no matter what happens, almost always the result is going to be positive. So I'd say that. Yeah.
That's great. So we have a few people watching, so I'm just going to open it up. If somebody might have some questions or something for us, go ahead and type in a question. I'll see if any questions come up. And so we'll be here for a little bit. And if no questions come up, then we'll thank everybody for being here. I wanted to kind of keep it under really 50 minutes, and we did that, so that was good. So I'm glad everyone kind of participated and came with, maybe I have a question. Ali asked him a question. Dr. Marco, what would a high-functioning person with Tourette syndrome look like in comparisons to someone with low functioning? Is there a spectrum? For Tourette, I'm not exactly an expert on that, but like I said, all the spectrum disorders, they call it a spectrum because, like, for him, for example, it might just be a blink. That would be like a high-functioning, a blink, that might be it. But then, somebody that has a big challenge, they might be flailing their arm and actually, doing the vocalizations. And, I've seen footage of, basically the girl was taking like pretty much every fourth or fifth sentence, she's saying a bad word and flailing and moving her head, right? So it can be really, really bad, right? So it's kind of like autism. I can have like a non-verbal floppy kid that doesn't do anything and just is sitting there. And then I can have another kid that looks totally fine and maybe just doesn't get a joke or a pun or something like that, which is on the other end, right? Everything else is okay, but they just, that little social thing. So that's kind of the spectrum there. Jenna says, very interesting. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Let's see. All right, we'll just wait one more minute. So once again, Lucas, I want to appreciate you, and I think you've given some great insight and some great information for people to learn. Let's see, I have another question from Richard now. Can you see the questions, Lucas?
Yeah. So with the guest condition, what is a good one or so takeaway for those of us that don't have it? What can we learn from this? Yeah. Absolutely. I think what's universal, that makes us all human, at some point in life, we all experience a challenge or a pain point or, something that we'd like to improve upon. Whether, you sprain your ankle or you're going through tough times, even now, right? Basically utilizing the resources you have in your environment, being resourceful, and really understanding like we're all capable of doing great things, and really focus on that. If you looked at like my LinkedIn profile, I'm involved in quite a few activities, and Tourette syndrome is just one part of those. And so I'd really say like what Tourette syndrome has taught me is don't be afraid to fail. And yeah, like always be thankful. Those two things are going to take you far.
Yeah, that's right. And there's one of my mentors from my past. I have sent some videos of his in the past to my patients is Dr. John DeMartini. And he does this thing called the quantum collapse process where people kind of get polarized or they're thinking, well, this is all bad, like, like a situation like the lockdown or whatever it is, right? And he says every situation always has a positive and a negative to it, but sometimes people just get fixated on one thing and they can't see the other side of it, but it's always there. Even like, like this, it's a condition. It's not, but then, you're up, you're learning, you're going to write a book, so how bad it might be on one side, there's always positive coming out of it. And then, so this might actually eventually get into somebody else's hands and might totally transform some other kid and make them say, you know what, I'm not going to take this as like a bad thing. And then, we'll have the next Prime Minister of Canada or something, who knows, right? So, that kind of thing, right? So it's really kind of cool. Ali, you see his comment there?
Lucas, congrats on the book. Now, as an author, what are your next goals regarding Tourette syndrome? Yeah, absolutely.
That's a good question.
Now that I've, well, I guess, I mean, I haven't mastered it, but I think now that I've, had quite a lot of progress in the student aspect, I've, been fortunate enough now to join as a director on the board of directors for Tourette Canada. So that's the national organization. And so now I plan to begin working towards the practitioner aspect. So it actually with this lockdown, I've started studying for the MCAT, the process towards medical school application so I can become, a practicing Tourette syndrome psychiatrist. And Richard Idles, what kind of doctor you wanted to be? Yeah, perfect. So yeah, basically a psychiatrist or neurologist. The reason for that being is because beyond just the medical degree, they also have 5 to 6 years of further specialization in basically the brain-body connection, the interaction with pharmaceuticals, and also just other things outside of the pharmaceuticals. The brain is incredibly complex. So that's kind of what I want to do and kind of work towards creating more information and a better understanding.
Awesome. Very cool. That's good. Richie probably wants you to be a chiropractor because I'm his chiropractor. but that's okay.
Bad news. Well, maybe that's next, Richard.
But we'll still stay connected, and hopefully we can continue to maybe you were talking about maybe doing some stuff together. And like I said, if I could get my hands on a lot more people and do some more neurology testing and try to work on a lot of that, that I'd really love to do that. So that would be good.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think now's a perfect time to begin, fostering collaboration and work on next steps. Yeah,
for sure. Like I say, I don't know everything. I just know a couple of small things in a small sort of sector of stuff, right? But then, people coming together, we always say it takes a village, right? So there's a lot of different aspects, from the psychological, mental, life, and coaching, all that kind of stuff put together can definitely help anybody, right? So we always say bring up the help of the person, and whatever they have, they're going to be a better person for it, even though they have the thing, right? Yeah, that's great. All right, so I think we can end it here. So I appreciate you very much, Lucas. That was great. Very informative. Thank you, Dr. Marco and Lucas. All right. So we'll say goodbye. Thanks, Lucas, for being here.
Thank you. Have a good night, folks. And thank you, Dr. Caravaggio. And Network Family Care Center. That's Dr. Caravaggio's practice. Great place once it's open up again.
Right now we're in quarantine, whatever, but hopefully we'll get back to normal running in a little while. So the Network Family Care Center is my chiropractic office in Markham, Ontario. So you can look up Network Family Care Center, ER, spelled the American way.com, and that's where our website is. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye. Bye-bye.